Good day, everyone. My name is Vin Maru from Financial Liberties, and today's guest is Versan Algera from Black Swan Capitalist. He was a gentleman I actually met online through Twitter, and I started following his posts about XRP, and I'm invested in XRP itself. I do believe in the fintech space, and I started following his posts, and we started connecting and chatting, and we had a great chat yesterday just before this interview, and I thought I really wanted him online and kind of talking with what his views are on what he sees in the financial markets. He's got a great channel and he does some great interviews that people I've known in the past. So yeah, Versan, welcome to the show, and please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure. And yes, we had a very engaging, productive phone call yesterday. For your audience, my name is Versan Algera. I've been an accomplished business owner, investor, trader, gold advocate, educator, researcher, and independent trends forecaster. And I was doing a lot of this stuff while studying to be an engineer, but I dropped out of college like 3 times. It was really in 2018 that I truly began to immerse myself in research and just learning everything I could of the things that I've always advocated for. I apologize. Including owning your own business, investing, and of course, wealth preservation through holding precious metals. I never formally taught these topics, but it was really, again, in 2018, as I learned more about the economic transition towards digital systems. That's when I really devoted myself to understanding the economy, the monetary mechanisms. And it was really in 2020, during the pandemic, that I realized that the global economy was undergoing a reset. And the realization of this was pivotal because in 2019, then I founded the Black Swan Capitalist. And the reason I gave it that name is to reflect our mission capitalizing on the greatest Black Swan event, and that's going to be the collapse and reset of the global monetary system. So a little bit about myself. At Black Swan Capitalist, we just offer one-on-one coaching to help individuals navigate the digital asset revolution, understanding the technologies behind cryptocurrencies, how to protect their wealth, develop exit strategies and so forth, and even gain a competitive and comprehensive understanding of market cycles just to enable people to make informed decisions.
Great. So I kind of got my red pill moment, if you want to call it, about the financial system back in about 2004, 2005, when I got introduced to the precious metals market. And I came from a tech background doing web and multimedia work. And since then, I've been a precious metals bug, whatever you want to call it. And I followed the sector quite a bit for the good 7-8 years. And then I moved on to the cannabis sector. But during that time, I actually met a gentleman who became an ex-partner. He got me into working within the metal space as a newsletter writer, speaking at conferences and stuff like that. So my red pill moment was back, almost 20 years ago. And it's great to see a younger generation now like yourself who's catching on to what's going on in today's world, because we are actually entering a paradigm shift in the financial markets. This is probably one of the biggest shifts and trends that I have seen coming in over 20 years. And I went through some of the tech boom, and that was a pretty big paradigm shift in itself when we started getting online media, internet was exploding, and then e-commerce and web. They call it Web 2. Now I think we're entering what they're calling Web 3. And that is really a game changer. I haven't seen a shift like this for a long time. And I found 2 or 3 major trends in my life and when I catch on to a trend, I generally follow it right from the early stages when I start believing in it, right through when I actually believe it's kind of played out and it's peaked out and it's time to get out as an investor. And I've called that, different times in the precious metals market in 2011, 2012, when it peaked out. And then I was involved in the cannabis space from about 2014 to 2019, 2020. And myself now, I'm in Mexico and emerging markets, but I'm still covering the financial market landscape that we're going through in terms of this transition period. So let's get into some of these topics that we want to discuss. It's an interesting environment that we're in. And the first topic really is about kind of the old financial world that we're coming from. So when we get into the topic of the new financial world, people have a little bit of basis and understanding of where we've seen the financial world was in the past and now where we see it going into the future. So maybe if you'd like to share some of your perspective on the old financial world, precious metals, fiat currencies, stock markets, where we were or where we've been for the last 15, 20 years. And then we'll get into kind of where the future is going.
Yeah, it's always best when we're talking about these things to go in a chronological order. That way we can understand the history and where we are right now, where we've been, and just where it's going to. But there's a lot of information that ties into that question. So I'll just try to keep it on a macro perspective here. But the traditional financial, that's the best way. It's always better to look at a bigger picture than a smaller one. And when you do cover a bigger picture, the smaller picture becomes very easy to understand and clear. But the traditional financial system is fundamentally based on borrowing and lending, so credit and debt. True currency, which has historically been gold, was removed from the equation in 1970. And I think for very sinister purposes, without going into too much detail, I think the move was intended to allow the central banks to consolidate wealth, take away your purchasing power, transfer control to central banks, which facilitated the growth of the military-industrial complex. And I think the consolidation was designed to enable the defense of the dollar through conflict. And I think as we're seeing now with the emergence of the BRICS nations, this is going to start slowly play into the picture. Now, that's just where we are today, right? A little bit. But the current system, I think, is unsustainable. And it's unsustainable even for the top 1%ers because they can no longer profit as they once did. We are undoubtedly in a transition period as digitization becomes more ingrained with the younger generations, and then you have evolving technologies. What we're witnessing really is a wealth transfer, a transfer of wealth into these new systems. And to answer your question, we are moving away from fiat-driven currencies to digital currencies, and some it's a two-tier system. Some currencies backed by hard assets. I'll get into that here shortly. But in my view, this technology is intended with the central bank digital currencies to really centralize control over the population through the CBDCs, which is designed to exert comprehensive and extensive control over the population. But we're transitioning to a new monetary system where commodities and hard assets are going to be backing. When I say back, I mean pegged with these digital currencies. And despite resistance and what you hear from the mainstream news, this reset is global. Everybody is playing a coordinated narrative, making it seem like there's conflict when I think in reality, there's a new quantum financial system being implemented. And we talked a little bit about this, how quantum computers and artificial intelligence is going to be driving and running the new financial infrastructure. So then the critical question for your audience becomes like, what technologies are we talking about? What technologies are the top 1% using for the transfer of wealth and assets? And I'm talking about stocks, derivatives, debt, credit, et cetera, et cetera. The transfer must be underpinned by a scalable, immutable blockchain technology, a distributed ledger technology, which is really what they want. And in my opinion, 90% of the cryptocurrencies that are already out there are absolutely worthless. These are, they claim their fame as money, but they're not. And I think only a few technologies targeting specific niches in the global economy are going to be utilized by the top 1%ers, making the great reset of all systems. And obviously this encapsulates the transition from the old financial system to the new one. So to answer your question, that's pretty much what we're experiencing and the transition we're living through right now. And I know that's a lot of information for most people. We'll get into the nitty-gritty details of which technologies are building this infrastructure. That way your listeners can position themselves for success.
Absolutely. And even during this transition that we're going into, you touched on how this new digital asset space, we're still seeing gold come into that space. So ironically, as we had gotten off the gold standard and been on a fiat currency system for a long time with the US dollar as a reserve currency of the world, we are transitioning into this new digital era of digital finance and tokenization of assets that are all coming. But ironically, we're still going to be backing some of these by commodities, which is kind of the building blocks of all societies. I mean, we all need commodities in a way. So it's interesting to see that as we move into this new paradigm shift of digital assets and digitization of all assets, that commodities and gold and silver in particular are going to be a part of that backing. I think oil will be as well, and a few other resources that are kind of the necessities and the building blocks of all societies. So, but then that being said, I also think we're actually going to enter a world where all asset classes are going to get tokenized and will be sold on a particular financial blockchain, maybe ones that are specific to various verticals. So there could be a real estate blockchain that focuses on tokenization of real estate assets. Then the bond market could get tokenized in its own format and way. And then you could have the stock market. So the one thing you did mention is that during this transition that it'll be harder to make money or certain things. I actually think that some of these major financial players are pushing for the digitization because they know they're going to actually make a lot of money in it. Like BlackRock, for example, they came out with their Bitcoin ETF not too long ago. Now you hear them talking about a lot of interest in tokenization of assets. I think they're actually going to push more and more digital assets into the ETF market, but that's going to be tokenized as well. So this is kind of the new paradigm shift that we're entering into. And I suspect they're the ones champion and driving it because it will give them more control over asset classes, but they'll also profit along the way. So as much as many people fear that, that they're going to enter this controlled environment, which is, I suspect it will be, there are ways to profit from it along the way. So either you can be a victim of this transition and not understand what's happening and not be a part of it, or you can choose to actually accept what it is, that this transitioning is happening with, regardless of what you and I want to believe it, whether it should happen, but it's happening, and partake in it. And I know you've talked in our other conversation, you've talked about some of the things that you look at. I'm very similar in some of my holdings and my investments. And so how about we transition into this new financial world? And you talk a lot about XRP and Ripple. And so let's get into that. And then we'll talk about maybe some of the other digital assets that are out there that are going to be a part of this new platform for finance.
Nicely said, by the way. I love the way you put things. You said everything so perfectly and well. First of all, I do want to clarify, there's a lot to unpack of what you said as well. As far as commodities backing digital currencies, I want people to understand those are the stablecoin narratives. That's where stablecoins will come into the picture of that conversation. And we're not going to talk about it in this video, but we'll certainly do another call on stablecoins so we can explain that to people. And that's really where the intersection between commodities and digital currencies are going to come into play. This is what the World Bank talks about. I did mention, and I apologize, I forgot to send you those documents. I will send them to you as soon as we're done with the call. And it's going to substantiate everything I've said about the stablecoin narrative and the intersection between precious metals and digital currencies. Now, I'm, again, a macro guy. So when I discuss like the technology that's underpinning the new monetary system, I look at the technology that's being put into place by the one percenters, and it's interoperable with select blockchains. And one that does stand out is RippleNet. And that's why I always talk about RippleNet. They have done partnerships with all central banks around the world. Now, through diligent research, something many in this space like to neglect. You have to do your research. And when you do, you discover that RippleNet is at the heart of the global payment system that they're building. They utilize a specific digital asset called XRP. XRP, for your audience, stands for Cross-Border Remittance Protocol. XRP also offers numerous benefits to the system, the new system. It makes transactions seamless. It's interoperable, which means it can communicate with other blockchains without the need for pre-funding. Essentially, XRP provides pure liquidity. It is liquidity, therefore it is like a digital gold. And liquidity is the primary driver of markets. So if people want to talk about this new monetary system and cross-border payments and Where's all this liquidity going to come from if it's not the dollar? The dollar liquidity is plunging. So again, the technology that's being put into place by the 1%ers, and that's all I do. My strategy is very simple. I follow the top 1%, 2%ers, what their strategy is, and I'm following in their footsteps. Very simple. Now, talking about ETFs, you did mention that. Mainstream news outlets, they're the ones who frequently promote Bitcoin, Solana, and Ethereum. Don't get me wrong. Can you make money? Absolutely. But these technologies, in my opinion, and I've done the research for this, they've been co-opted by the financial institutions, the very same financial institutions that the advocates are opposing. So there's a conflict of interest there. They're the ones building the ETFs around them to profit as much as they can. Many people see ETFs as beneficial. I totally get it. But in reality, they're just another scheme to funnel money to the top 1%, much like traditional ETFs, which is very common. ETFs are a way to keep people within the existing system and even impoverish them to a degree without really exposing their strategy behind it. And in contrast, the top 1% are going to be using the XRP ledger. Central banks around the world are going to be using the XRP ledger. Every country so far has partnered with Ripple and using the technology to build the infrastructure, which is RippleNet, to facilitate XRP as a global reserve currency settlement mechanism, very similar to the role of the dollar. Now, going back to the dollar and why I talk about XRP again is as the dollar loses its status, credibility, purchasing power, and trust, which is happening, XRP is going to emerge as a substitute that can coexist with the US dollar, making it an ideal candidate for the role of the dollar to function very similar to it, because again, it is a cross-border payment system, very similar to the dollar. The dollar is a cross-border payment system. You cannot conduct trade in energy, oil and gas, or so forth without using the dollar. And this has even been stated by the World Bank and the Bank of International Settlements. Even the IMF has said that XRP could be used to mitigate a debt crisis. The information is readily available. Anyone can access it, but people don't do their research. And I've been sharing this for the last 5 years, although few people have caught on in the crypto space. And I hate to say this, I'm not trying to brag here, but many crypto YouTubers are just reiterating what I've been saying for the last 5 years, and obviously not giving me the credit. And I don't care about that, but it doesn't change the fact that this is the greatest wealth transfer in human history, is the XRP ledger. Everything else, I think, is for that two-tier system. And it makes sense that BlackRock would co-opt Solana and Bitcoin and Ethereum and push for this tokenization. If they're going to consolidate all the wealth and assets through tokenized smart contracts, that's one way to do it. So I'm very weary about all of this. And again, they're touting this technology while they're doing this. Look at what they're doing, not what they're saying. Everybody's saying Bitcoin, Bitcoin. Doesn't that concern people? Isn't there something devious about that? The 1%ers will never, ever share their strategy with you. You have to figure that out on your own. And that's one thing I always encourage people to think about. Be mindful of that. So that's my 2 cents.
It makes sense what you said. It's great because you've shed some light on what XRP is going to be in the system. But I actually think of it as 2 separate classes of investment. So you're going to have the digitization of all assets and the ETFs, all of that. That's an investment class. Someone will speculate on certain investments. And we do that all the time. Now, people hold the dollars and use it for global transactions. So I think when I look at it is Ripple, XRP, RippleNet is going to be that platform mechanism which SWIFT may have been used for, or some of these other cross-border payment systems. So that's the payment system. The asset classes are going to still be the asset classes that are investable. Some are more investable than others, obviously. And you're going to get a narrative like everyone's pushed the Bitcoin ETFs, and now you're going to get the Ethereum. In fact, I hear Ripple or XRP could come out with its own ETF at some point. So I look at it as Ripple, XRP, and RippleNet is just going to replace the cross-border payment system, as you had mentioned, and be part of that financial landscape. But then there's all other asset classes that'll be performed on the Ripple platform for transactions, but they will have their own metrics for evaluating individual asset or individual investments for those particular assets. So, for example, if you take a real estate project that gets tokenized, is that real estate project still viable to invest in? Sure. I mean, it could go up significantly. And so I have my own thoughts because I got invested in XRP back in about 2014-ish, I think it was, after I started discovering and talking about Bitcoin when it was under $10 with my ex-business partner. Oh. And I wish I bought Bitcoin back then, but I started getting investing a little earlier, and XRP was one of them that's always been on my radar, because I understood back then that they're going to try to make this as the mechanism for the global trade and global finance for payment systems. So it made total sense. Obviously, it hasn't performed like Bitcoin or any of these other currencies. So my question to you on it is, and here's my thought, maybe you've got a little different idea of it, but XRP, the token itself, is like the dollar. So could XRP just only go to $1 and I don't want to say it's going to be pegged to the US dollar, but trade within that in terms of a value for transferring funds? But the real investment is behind the technology of what Ripple has and investing in Ripple, because they'll have the majority of the lion's share of global transactions. So I'm trying to determine, is it better to hold XRP or invest in Ripple and Ripple Labs itself?
No, I think that it's better to own the digital asset XRP, because the thing is, RippleNet built the rails to where all this technology is being built upon. XRP is what makes Ripple valuable. Ripple can't be Ripple without XRP. It is the heartbeat of Ripple. As far as price, that's really what stablecoins are for. So I'll give you an example. You look at Tether. Tether is backed by $1. It is $1 in the digital format.
Right.
So that's really what the stablecoins do. They keep things at a stable price, and they fluctuate a little bit. I get that, right? XRP is not a stablecoin. It could be classified as a stablecoin. You could build stablecoins upon the XRP ledger, which is, I think, what they're doing.
Yeah.
As far as the price of XRP, it has to be a very high price to function as the technology was designed to function. And I don't like to cling to what David Schwartz says and Brad Garlinghouse. I do my own research, and when you look at the tokenomics, there's only 100 billion out there. No more can ever be created. It can only be destroyed for every time you use it. Now, the way I like to look at XRP with 100 billion supply, and I'll get more into the details of it, but it's like the treasure chest that every time you open it to use it, it shrinks. Therefore, the treasure chest becomes more valuable. The price goes up in a sense. So XRP is going to have a very high price for it to function as a global reserve currency settlement mechanism to move the value around the world. And every time it burns, it increases the price. And I've stated this many times, if you actually go deep down the rabbit hole as far as like the technology, the price of XRP could easily be infinite, and it never just burns. So every time you use it, it increases the price, and institutions are never going to sell the XRP. There's a lot of information that I've put out there about the XRP price, but there's also the incentive for central banks to dissolve global debt, and they can't do this with a low XRP price. And I think that's really where the centerpiece of XRP is. For it to function as it needs to function, the price does have to be a lot higher. And of course, I can get more into the details, but I rather actually talk about how people can protect themselves through the economic transition, as far as like positioning themselves and what technologies. But yeah, I've done so many videos on the XRP price in the past, but for it to function again as a global reserve currency settlement mechanism, and for it to do what it's designed to do, the price would have to be high. I also made a statement before that the IMF would probably set the price at a very high price. So the way I look at it is this. So when I said that the IMF would set the price of XRP, I want people to understand it like this. Think about the process of launching an IPO of an initial public offering for a company. Typically, what happens is all the partners involved come together, they discuss everything thoroughly, they evaluate the company's value, the technology's value, then they agree on the price before the company goes public. And once this price is set high, the public can start purchasing it, using it, trading it in the company's shares. That's pretty much how an IPO works. Absolutely. This is similar. What has transpired already is that central banks have actually convened with major financial institutions like the Bank of International Settlements, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the Vatican Bank, and others. They have collectively decided on a price for XRP. Now, I don't have proof of this, but it's in the writing if you understand how to break it down. The decision obviously hasn't been revealed yet, but it's going to operate very similar to the IPO process of how it works. And over the past 2 years so far, and again, not bragging, but many of and I don't like to call it predictions because there are no predictions, but we've read the documents and everything we've been putting out over the last 2 years so far, including the stablecoin narrative, including that, they have been revealed correct. We haven't been wrong. They've been accurate. And the reason why is because we actually have documents that talks about it, right? And, I think people are starting to understand the analogy better of what I'm saying. I put that out there a while ago. But XRP's technology is even unique. And as it gains universal acceptance, adoption worldwide, particularly for the large-scale financial institutions, it's not designed for retail use. It never was. The price will need to be high for it to function effectively as a settlement mechanism. And this high price, I think, is going to be coupled with the technological features and the burn rate, which will naturally enhance its liquidity, driving the price even higher. I know that's a lot of information for people. They're like, what the hell did he just say there? But it's important to look at things like this and understand them. And for me, how did I really come to the conclusion? I put a video out, a short in 2019 or 20, I think, about the XRP price. And I look back at it now and I'm like, well, I made sense back then too. It's just, I understand it better now. But I wasn't wrong. I was very close to getting it. And people will call this speculation. It's not speculation. This is going to be the centerpiece for the new financial system. And for it to function the way it needs to, again, the price has to be high. And the technology is, again, interoperable with other technologies. And liquidity is needed. So there's a lot of information. And I'm not a banker, but I get it.
I really love the analogy you put on with XRP in terms of comparing it to an IPO launch. Because in the precious metal space and in the cannabis space, I was involved in many of the initial IPOs. And I understood how that process and mechanisms work because, I knew some of the brokers that were doing a lot of the underwritings for some of these companies, especially in the cannabis space when it was early stages. And it really seems like it's the early adopters that get in early on those IPO pricings before they go public. And then it's usually the retail, then the institutional major fund monies come into it. They'll drive it higher. It's usually, I find, the retail investor who gets an understanding of what it is and finally gets to invest in it. And at that point, you're very close to the top of the market. And I suspect that's what's going to happen with XRP over the next decade or so, however long it takes to implement all of this. And it's a transition period. I think you and I will probably both agree, but I personally don't think it's going to happen overnight. But there is one thing that's coming up with the Securities Exchange Commission and their settlement. And supposedly the rumor mill is that, they've finally agreed on a price that is fair for settlement. And it may come out soon. It may not. The speculation is there. But hey, I'd like to get your thoughts on what you think will happen with the price of XRP once it is settled. And then do you think they'll actually start pushing XRP into ETFs or other investable asset classes outside of actually owning the XRP itself on your own, which I suggest people do. Why would you want to buy an XRP ETF when you can actually own the token itself? So I'd love just to hear where your thoughts are on maybe some of the timing of this, when the settlement will happen, but what you think will happen after the settlement. And I know I'm going to ask you the price projections, but obviously there's so many caveats and disclaimers you're going to have to make on that, which, just touch on it. But I suspect, and the numbers I've heard from some financial people that I speak to in the States about the XRP number, I have a hard time believing it because it's significantly high. But it keeps me invested in XRP, and I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on it.
Yeah. So let's start with the SEC lawsuit. you don't even have to dig in anymore. That the SEC represents the financial institutions, the big banks, right? The SEC is putting on a show and buying time for the technology to take hold, for them to even maybe have access to it. But the SEC can't do anything about the Ripple lawsuit. It is a show for the world as the technology continues to be widely accepted, adopted, put in on the payment rails. So they're just buying time. They really are. And you know, if I can go down a little bit of a rabbit hole as far as the XRP and the SEC lawsuit, do I have your permission to go down that rabbit hole?
Sure, let's hear it.
Okay, so the more I look into the SEC lawsuit with Ripple, it becomes very clear that the true motivation behind the Ripple lawsuit is that this isn't just an American issue anymore. It's a geopolitical one. And again, understanding the technology, you'll know XRP isn't just any regulated currency. By the way, it is regulated. It's already deemed a currency. The SEC has no control. And by the way, the SEC is too small to handle something that is a geopolitical issue. It is not an American issue. It has the potential, again, to act as a cross-border global reserve currency settlement mechanism, very similar to how the dollar works. So the research shows that this has actually been planned out for a long time. And I'm telling you, in real time, you're going to see that as the dollar's role diminishes further, countries, governments, including the US, and central banks will turn to XRP as an alternative. Since it offers a robust cross-border settlement mechanism that can still coexist with the dollar. Everything is falling into place, and I think there's a geopolitical shift that we're already seeing in the world today that reflects a broader move by the central banks towards the digital currency and the blockchain technology, which would explain, again, why the central banks, including the US central bank, and they haven't disclosed it yet, but there is evidence that Fed now even was talking about using Ripple's technology. Positioning XRP as a key player in all of this. So, you know, that the lawsuit is just for the masses to convince them that there is something there that's not right, that it could potentially go to zero, or they could get shut down, but you can't. Once you put the blockchain out there, it's able to function. So even if they wanted to, they can't stop it. That's what it means. That's what the technology does. So it's all bullshit. And a settlement is unnecessary and inevitable at the same time. Just understanding just the macro geopolitical landscape and how the economy is transitioning with the digital distributed ledger technology, you know right there and then, by understanding that in detail, that it's all bullshit. It's a show. It's just to keep the masses distracted, and they're continuously touting other technologies that nobody is investing, that nobody is using it. And I mean, there's just so much information that goes into this. And, you know, I can even talk about Tether and Bitcoin propping up the whole damn market, which is proof that that's out there. And they're talking about this, but they're doing this. So they're just buying time. The SEC lawsuit doesn't mean shit. It really doesn't. And excuse my language, but it's the truth.
I agree, yeah.
Yeah, it's all about the fear, uncertainty, and doubt of the FUD.
Yeah, and I think you're right that it's kind of a delay mechanism until they have the rails in place and they're ready to launch it. But I you know, and I actually do believe a lot of these central banks insiders, they're all have or will continue to accumulate XRP. So, you know, I mean, again, this is a transition period. I think it's going to take years before we get adoption. But being you know, a Black Swan capitalist, my suspicion is there'll be a financial triggering event, a black swan that's going to come, that's going to have to force people to understand that the old system that we talked about earlier is no longer viable, and we need to transition to this new system. And during that transition, that black swan event, which I suspect is actually coming sooner than later, we're going to have this transition to this whole new digital ledger technology that we talked about, the cryptocurrency markets. And I think I think there'll be a bit of room for many of the mainstream cryptos to be of value. But again, those are investable asset classes. I think at the end of the day, it's going to be XRP that will be the platform for cross-border settlements between central banks. And then it may get extended beyond just central bank cross settlements. It could be from company to company. I agree with you. I mean, you've shared your ideas with the SEC and and how that is playing out. I actually do believe it's a bit of a smoke and mirror show, but much like U.S. government politics and politics around the world, it's also a smoke and mirror show. So it's just the world we live in, and XRP could be part of that whole DLT technology, the tokenization of assets. So if you want to transfer big capital, big money, you're going to have to. Not going to have to, but XRP will be one of the options that you can use to make those transfers happen.
Yeah. If I can put in something here for your audience, I try so hard to make things in a that's what I do on Twitter, is I try to condense things, macro things into a few characters, right? And I'll try to put it in context for them, for your listeners to understand. And it's not just Ripple. I want people to know I have a very, very diversified portfolio, which we're going to talk about here shortly. But the overall message is that Ripple and Stellar together, they're complementary towards each other, by the way. They're not in competition. Those two technologies, those companies, are building the payment rails for all the central banks and financial institutions on the planet, where XRP and XLM will be the digital currencies running on them. Once you understand that, that's when you'll understand that owning something as priceless as these two puts you far ahead of the financial institutions. I hope that makes sense to people.
So I got a quick question about that then.
Sure.
So you mentioned Stellar, XLM, and we've talked significantly about XRP. Do you think it's going to be the Sony and Beta VHS debate? Like, you had both come out there, but one was the chosen one, and it became the dominant player. Or is there going to be enough room that you're going to have both of them work in this new financial system at the same time? Much like you see, there's the US dollar, but then there's the euro dollar, the British pound, the yen, they're the main currencies around the world, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we're going into a multipolar world. And the reason I say this is because there is a great divide between what you see happening in the West, the NATO, and what you see happening with the BRICS alliance, BRICS, China, India, Brazil, pretty much the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And then you have your Zionists out here putting this new totalitarian, woke, satanic agenda. And I'm sorry to mention that, but they're not even hiding anymore.
No.
Disgusting people. They're trying to put transgender people in office. Like, I hate to say this, but you're trans, you have some mental issues. You really do. And we're not going to get into that, and don't worry, it's not going to get shadowed. But there's a divide. And if we're going to have peace, I think even the technologies that we're talking about are going to be the solution to having that peace in a multipolar world. And that's why I said XRP is even a geopolitical issue. It really is. If you want to circumvent the dollar without destroying the dollar and basically confronting the U.S. military-industrial complex, you're going to need two different kind of currencies, possibly. Multipolar world, different currencies. But then again, XRP and XLM, they're not doing the same thing. The Stellar Foundation has an agenda to bank the unbanked.
Okay. Where
XRP is really designed for cross-border settlements. And then if you look at these technologies in detail, and I put a video about this like 2 years ago, they're very complementary towards each other, but very different. But still, their movements on the charts, they mirror each other. That is a very interesting component to the discussion, which I still don't understand. There are facts that haven't been revealed yet. Then you have Jed McCaleb, who built the XRP ledger, and Jed McCaleb built the XLM as well, the same creator for both. Apparently, the narrative they sold to the public is that, oh, we didn't agree on certain things, so he left. I think that's nonsense. And if you actually look even deeper, Jed McCaleb's parents, they trace back to some of the bloodlines. So we're not going to get into that as well. But I think they're going to be using both. And again, they're complementary towards each other. I don't think there's going to be one to rule them all. But I do see the centerpiece is being the XRP still.
Yeah.
And everything else is being built around it. And again, being interoperable with it. That's your reset. If I had a piece of paper, I could draw it for you. And visuals are very helpful for a lot of people out there. So I'll, go ahead and send that to you. It's even in the Ripple documents, how it shows that they're interoperable with other digital assets. But then again, XRP is the centerpiece. So, I mean, there's a lot of information. We can go on and on about this.
Yeah, I think I actually bought some Stellar a long time ago, and I may have gotten rid of it. I can't even remember right now. But so from what it sounds like, it's XRP is going to be the central banker's coin, if you want to call it that, for them to use. Stellar will be the emerging markets, the unbankable, possibly somewhere in that, maybe with the BRICS alliance, who knows? But you think both are worth owning, and I agree. I think I keep hearing about Stellar and a few others, and then yesterday you mentioned Caspar, and I kind of looked at it in the past, more so recently. I think I just discovered it, but I think there's this whole new fintech and how lending markets and digital finance is going to be evolving along on this whole platform. So it's not just going to be that it's XRP and Stellar and that's it. There's going to be others out there that'll be the dominant player for different use cases. And I think at the end of it, there's thousands of coins out there. Not all of them are going to survive. It's like the .com boom and bust that happened. You got so many companies going into it. I think there's going to be certain coins that are going to be they're going to get mass adoption for specific use cases. And those coins will have value in and itself for those particular use cases, but the mechanism, the rails is still going to be the XRP. That's
right. That's correct. Thank you very much for clarifying that. I try so hard to put things in a short sentence where people can understand it. It's just my mind is in 1,000 places at the same time. It's very disturbing sometimes. But one thing, let's focus on those other technologies, because there are quite a few, by the way, that are complementary to even the XRP ledger and serving different purposes in the global marketplace. So protecting yourself through this transition is very challenging. And I understand that because even myself, I'm constantly having to switch from one set of assets to another just to keep up with rising inflation. And, it's a struggle I know from personal experience. So this is the problem, though. And for your audience, the problem is that the dollar is losing its purchasing power faster than people can earn the money. That's very scary. That means we're in decline, and it's accelerating, by the way. Most Americans and people around the world, but mostly in America, they live on borrowed time, credit cards, and debt. Again, borrowing and lending. And the scary thing is that it's all coming to a halt. As liquidity plunges, because the dollar's purchasing power continues to decline, borrowing and lending stop. Therefore, you have a halt in the global economy. The scary thing is by the time that money reaches your pocket, inflation has already eroded its value, making it increasingly difficult to even position yourself for the transition of the new system. And it's truly unfortunate that most people are going to miss out on this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Very few people have the patience to listen to what we're talking about here. Now, to protect yourself, you need to focus on what we already know. And the documents from the Bank of International Settlements and the bank, they indicate that this new system, again, will be backed by commodities. We're in the early stages of a commodity super cycle just by looking at markets and where this is all going. So it makes sense to even own physical assets like gold and silver. And now I'm trying to explain to people how they can position themselves. Owning like gold and silver, which is extremely undervalued due to market manipulation, Holding precious metals is one way to preserve your wealth, as they are likely to increase in value as the dollar decreases in value in fiat currencies worldwide. Another strategy is to invest in the technologies. That's what we're going to talk about now, is the technologies that are building the infrastructure for this new financial system. And it's not just the financial system, it's all systems, supply chains, you name it, etc. Now, some of the key technologies include the XRP, that's one, XLM, XDC, Algorand, HBAR, CASPA, KASPA, just for people, they always mix it with Casper,
Yeah.
IOTA, IOTA, SHX, and you mentioned this earlier about new tokenized borrowing and lending credit systems. That's what Velo is doing, VELO. And Quant. Quant is building the new central bank digital currency platforms for central banks to manage those who miss out on this transition. Now, these technologies are going to become, all of them, the ones I just explained, they're going to become widely used and accepted as this transition accelerates. Their value is likely to increase, allowing you to participate again in the greatest wealth transfer in history as traditional assets move onto the blockchain, to these digital systems. And I also encourage people to, shift their spending habits. I think too many people, they go out, they spend all their money on alcohol, partying, nightclubs. And I'm talking to the youth. I think it's essential to invest in water, food, guns, ammunition, because things are going to get chaotic as the transition fully takes place, especially as the wealth gap continues to widen, because it will continue to widen. And that discontent is going to lead to a dangerous situation. So it's crucial to just be prepared. Also, maintaining mental health is vital. There's so much happening in the world. And this is something I had to learn from experience. I went down the rabbit hole and it drove me crazy for a little bit. And it's not just money, it's everything else as well.
Yeah.
With so much happening in the world, with these narratives that are designed to distract you, to manipulate, to hurt you, I understand how easy it is to feel, overwhelmed. But the real adversaries are the mainstream news, the propaganda, and the central banks. Now, the sad thing is you can't beat the central banks at their own game, but by following the steps I just explained here, you can easily position yourself for the transition while still staying mentally strong. But yeah, make sure your audience is certainly diversified. A diversified portfolio allows you to survive the transition without losing so much as well. It's just a very unique situation because most people are falling into poverty real fast, and it's accelerating. So,
oh, I agree, and I've been talking about diversification of assets and hard asset ownership for a long time. I'm down here in Mexico, and there's a great community down here. So, as much as there's kind of this whole narrative of doom and gloom, and it's all going to blow up, and people are going to lose everything. I actually am very positive in today's financial world because I see so many opportunities that most people will not see because they're in their own little lens and their own little world of a view of how they see things happening. And I mean, I agree with the diversification. I'm glad you touched on some of these topics outside of the Ripple, the cryptocurrencies that you've mentioned that you think are of value. And I agree with you. A lot of them are. I haven't delved into all of them in specific, but I do believe we're at a point where if you want to have outperform the market, this is the new technology that's going to be coming down the pipe. We're at not even early stage adoption. We're just kind of laying the foundation. Then the adoption phase happens, and then you get that hockey stick move, and that's still coming, I believe. So, why I choose these investments over a lot of others at this moment in time is because you don't have the adoption as predominant as, let's say, people who've invested in the real estate market or the bond market or the stock market. But yet, this technology, this transformation that in the financial markets and the tools that you mentioned that are going to be used to underline it, it still has mass adoption rate coming ahead. So I kind of take it as the analogy when I got invested in the cannabis sector early on, 2014, I started. No one believed in the cannabis sector. The brokers, no one would even touch it. You had credit investors that were speculating early on. But as you saw legalization happen, then you started getting the brokers investing money, the big money started coming in. But it wasn't again to the end when the retail investor finally caught on, and then you had that hockey stick moment. You knew it was time to get out. So what I'm saying is that we're in that same time frame right now with some of these technologies you've talked about, and we'll link some of them in the description below, so follow that. But I do believe it is time to start looking at these and seriously, taking a bit of a position. It's a speculative position, just like gold is a speculative position. Well, they say it is. I actually am a firm believer that it's not as speculative as they want to make it, but they don't want you to be invested in certain things that are actually going to rise as the dollar falls in value. So it's great that you touched on these transition tokens and coins and tools. And as part of the whole digitization of all assets, many of these will be the building blocks for this new financial system. So I think it is a great time to actually be invested in them. But it's still not to say that there are not other asset classes that will still continue to do well. But you've got to dig into these various asset classes, because some have just gone ridiculously high in price in terms of like real estate in specific regions. So if you're a real estate investor, you can actually still find value in certain regions versus others. And so the hard assets, the resource sector, absolutely, water scarcity could be a big theme going forward. I followed the resource sector and the precious metal sector starting in around 2004, 2005, and kind of became, I don't want to call us an expert, but I was very knowledgeable by 2012, 2013. And I followed that whole boom in the commodity sector during that time. As I see it, we're at an early stages of commodities boom, but it's not going to take dominance in terms of the financial investment coming into it, as we're going to see in this crypto new fintech space. And the reason why I say that is that's still the hot topic right now. But as if we get into a World War III situation, or as emerging markets continue to need build out their economies and their infrastructure, and BRICS nations continues to grow, then these countries still will require a ton of commodities. So I think that commodity cycle is going to take a bit of a back burner to some of the other stuff we've talked about, but nonetheless, it is a dominant force that's going to happen going forward. I mean, I can't see commodities ever stopping, but there's a cyclicality to everything, and then there's kind of the trends. I like to call myself an investor in trends. I follow trends. If I can see something happening early on, get invested. And I just don't think the commodity sector is in a trending market right now. Is it something of value and will continue to rise? Yes. The only thing that I could see that will be a significant trend in that is precious metals. But oil, for example, you've got a certain amount of oil production in the world, and that kind of fluctuates. It looks like, based on the old charts, we're just in a sideways trading range. So unless something disrupts the oil market to get it to go past $85 a barrel, sure.
We'll certainly do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it could happen. But until that, you really don't know. It's just in a sideways trend. So you can invest in the trend. That's a great way to do it. But I always try to find something that's an emerging trend that's going to have a 3 to 5 year window, and it's early stages. And I still see this whole adoption of the crypto technology and the new fintech space as that early adoption phase. And it's been around for a while, but where I think we're at that point where we're going to start to see the hockey stick moment. And that probably is going to start in this year, next year, but the hockey stick's going to go up for at least the remaining part of this decade, I believe.
Yeah, 100%. And, a lot to unpack in what you said. First of all, for real estate investors, I totally get a lot of people want to be in real estate. So I talked to Grant Cardone and Gary Cardone off record, and we did an interview with them. And they told us that they were selling a lot of their real estate here in the U.S. because there's a real estate bubble coming. We already knew the bubble was coming.
Sure.
It was set off by the pandemic, by the way. since they encourage people to work at home. You have a situation where no one's going into the office. Now, next thing you know, the banks, well, the reset of the commercial, and it will, of course, spill into the residential. We're going to see a big bubble burst in the real estate market again, because as people stop going to work, the people were in a position to default on their loans. And that's going to spill over to the market, highly leveraged in debt and credit. So if you're looking into real estate, I wouldn't buy for a while. Wait for the bubble to come burst, and then you buy when everything's cheap. Always buy when there's blood on the streets and sell when there's greed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's number one rule of investing. And I had to learn that many times over and over. And that's something, we still kind of screw up even as we learn more about it. But so that's one part. The other thing is there are a lot of other investment opportunities. And I think commodities is the best. I know it's not trending much, but if you look again at what the strategy is of the 1%ers, the central banks are buying up all the gold. The top 1%ers are buying up all the gold. I talked to Robert Kiyosaki. He's buying up all the gold. And, he's not informed as much as I am on the XRP. And even though I've shared those documents with him and talked to him about the stable coins and the intersection between the technology and gold. But when he saw that too, the stablecoin narrative, he was pretty, he was surprised. He didn't know about it, but commodities, gold is certainly a great investment strategy. It's going to preserve your wealth as the dollar continues to decline and currencies all around the world. Another thing is emerging economies. I mean, one way to look at this is that, let's say, as the US economy slows down, and that's really what's happening here, it's going to eventually approach a halt. And I think other countries are going to start to emerge from the shadows because they're no longer constrained by the US dollar. For those who don't know, the dollar has been used as a weapon, forcing countries to transact in it, while weakening their currencies, creating inflation, and impoverishing their own people, here and abroad. But then again, the technologies like XRP which I think the digital asset space is the new emerging economy. If you want to be wealthy, that is the best place to be. You're going to get the greatest return on investment for nothing because these things are absolutely undervalued. The institutions, however, mixed the most precious technologies out there with a bunch of shit coins. So that way you did not know how to discern what's right from wrong as far as investment strategy. It's true. Yeah, that's what they did. They mixed it in all together. So you didn't know how to do your research and what to look for. You just look for the next like Shiba Inu, right? Without understanding the implementation of the technology. So again, following the greatest return on investment, 1% strategy, I always go to XRP because that's the money for the new system, right? The rails. But as the dollar's dominance continues to fade, you're going to see emerging economies in other countries, emerging countries as well, become new leaders. And just to also touch on XRP again, it's just XRP provides sovereignty for countries to make it, to invest and to reallocate their investment strategies and become emerging economies because it gives them the sovereignty. And when the US economy does crash, which it inevitably will, America is most likely going to face the most severe turmoil in history. So you want to make sure that you have, again, a diversified portfolio, staying and investing in a failing system, which is the US, like bonds. I wouldn't recommend that. It's very akin to staying in a burning castle. I know we talked, you're in Mexico, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So like Mexico shows promise, in my opinion, as an emerging economy, despite the recent election interference by BlackRock. I know they won that election. I'm not stupid. And see, I don't even talk about this, but I do know. I'm always engaged with the geopolitical situation because me personally, I am looking for an exit strategy outside the United States, and I do have one. There are other countries like Argentina and even Saudi Arabia that present opportunities. I get that. But then
El Salvador too.
Salvador too, yeah. It's just many people, including myself, we're a little bit hesitant to leave the country because of the escalating global tensions. And I'm talking about the threat of war because the United States military-industrial complex and the geopolitical forces that are driving us into conflict. I'm talking about NATO. They are going to try to confront this. Whatever you want to call it, but the BRICS nations, what they're trying to do. So I always try to just tell people to, stay informed, make, decisions based on personal research and just understanding how everything is playing out. Again, personally, I do plan on leaving the country. I even do plan on renouncing my United States citizenship eventually. I have two citizenships. I have a Saudi citizenship as well. But the problem is my U.S. citizenship is becoming a liability.
Absolutely.
Excessive taxation, excessive inflation, and the collapsing dollar. While many people complain about rising prices, the truth is your dollar is being devalued at an accelerated rate. And the BRICS nations, they're going to move again towards gold-backed and commodity-based currencies, and we're going to see more countries rise as emerging economies. So, like you said in the beginning, the shift presents so much opportunity for those who are willing to adapt and to invest wisely in the new landscape.
Yeah, I look at it this way. I grew up in Canada my whole life. And if I had to choose, let's say start a new business or try to do something in Canada, it's a built-out economy, just like the US and most Western economies are. But when you go to these emerging economies, you still have their building phase of building out the economy. So you could be an entrepreneur, an investor, and do a lot of very cool things that are still early stages in these countries. So I look at it this way: the U.S., Canada, most Western countries are debt-based. It's going to collapse because they've over-leveraged themselves. But the emerging economies are not leveraged. Mexico, most of the people buy and own their homes outright. So I actually believe homeowners in Mexico are probably more wealthier than your average homeowner in the US or in Canada. It's one thing. I live in Puerto Vallarta. It is probably one of the most expensive places in all of Mexico, especially there's this region just north of here. It's not cheap by any means, but there are lots of areas and other regions in Mexico that are obviously a lot cheaper. And then other countries too. So I look at it as this way: you can stick around in a declining economy that's been has had dominance, but is losing that dominance power in these westernized countries, or you go to these emerging economies, and if you've got some great skills or knowledge and apply that, you're at the forefront of their economies blowing up. And I'm going to give you, like, I'm in Mexico, but I was born in India, so I can always go back to India at some point. And if you look at India in terms of the fundamentals for it, there's no other country in the world right now that has the fundamentals that India does have. So you got, almost 1.4 billion people now, more population than China. But India's population is very spread out among the various age groups. So between, let's say, people that are in high school or just coming out or in college and are just entering the workforce to that 35-year-old that are in the workforce, there's probably 300 to 400 million people, maybe a little more in that age group, and they are entering their prime spending years. India has an affinity to gold. Most Indians do have gold as well as other things. So, and India just repatriated their gold out of England recently. So I'm going to see, it's going to be a very interesting time for India. If gold happens to break out of this kind of $2,300-$2,400 range, and it takes off to the next level, and we get a BRICS nations kind of remonetizing gold in backing their individual currencies with gold and other commodities. I actually think that India, whose population owns a lot of physical gold in the form of jewelry, but it's usually 22 karat jewelry, so it's high value gold, you're going to see their wealth explode. And not just beyond that, but their emerging economy is doing so well that I'm actually probably, if I had to pick one country going forward, I would almost say India is going to be the most bullish for me.
I can see that easily. It's not in the BRICS alliance. If you look at what they're doing, and this has been shadowed by the U.S. mainstream media, they don't want you to know what other countries are doing. They only show you the bad stuff, right? And say, oh, we have enemies all around the world. No, we don't. The enemy stems from the United States. But in these BRICS nations, they're encouraging their citizens to own real currency, gold. Yeah. It's a beautiful thing. I have never seen a government, and maybe not looking out for their best interest to the extent you'd like them to, but encouraging them that this is where it's going. This is the new system we're putting in place. You guys need to own gold, and you have the choice. But they're telling them, and they're not wrong. When in the US, they're putting bills into place, like Senator Warren. I wrote a whole paper on this. Senator Warren is putting bills into place to enslave people in the dollar because nobody wants it. Force the citizens to own the dollar. Did you know they have laws in place where they can force US citizens to buy the bonds?
Well, I think that's what's going to happen with the 401ks.
Yes, take it from your 401k, take it from your pension, your social security, your retirement, because we got to hold the dollar up because it's failing, because nobody in the world wants it.
Yeah.
It's a very scary situation. And it's weird, even for people who want to renounce their citizenship like myself, because the US citizenship is a liability. Therefore, I'm not going to try to hold this burning castle up. They're charging people and they're increasing the price to renounce your citizenship. I didn't know you had to pay to renounce your own citizenship. What kind of bullshit is that? Why would they do that? You have to ask the right questions, and then you can think the rest out. If people know how to critically think for themselves, they would only put those laws into place because they know that that moment is coming where you're going to be the one holding the bag. And guess what the 1%ers are doing here in the US? They're positioning themselves with the technologies we just talked about and gold.
Yeah. It's
funny.
1%
strategy.
It's funny you kind of mentioned that. I do actually believe they're going to nationalize 401ks and force people into government bonds, the U.S. government bond treasury market. My ex-business partner, when I was writing about gold back in the day and speaking at conferences, he actually said that the wall was being built between Mexico and that to keep the American slaves in, not the other way around. So it's kind of funny dichotomy, but I think as we go through this transition, they are going to make it a lot harder for people to exit out of these Western countries. It's going to get more costlier. There'll be an exit tax, and they've already talked about this, and they're talking about raising capital gains tax. So you still have a window of opportunity to get out of those countries if you want. Most will not take that opportunity, sadly enough. They're going to get trapped in it. So I'm glad you're sharing ideas and investment strategies that people can benefit from staying within those markets, and it has great upside. But I find that when I've moved down here and people are moving to these emerging economies, the whole point of me starting the Financial Liberties channel and the website and the platform that I'm trying to build on based on an educational things is trying to seek financial liberties out of failing economies and failing markets. And so for me, it's, financial liberties is about education, diversification, getting out of the old system into the new, but doing it in a way so you're not on the government radar, or just minimizing all interactions if you can with governments, and get your own freedoms. Jim Sinclair says it's the best, is become your own central bank. And that's why you need to own these assets in your own name, whether you've got Bitcoin, crypto, whatever you own. Make sure you own the tokens and you have the keys. Now, the other thing with the BRICS, and just kind of circling back to gold, what I find interesting is you had the US dollar hegemony controlling the world and then issuing debts to other countries that had to get paid back in US dollars. And I hope we see the unwinding of that. But why I actually believe BRICS countries are going to push for gold and other commodities, not just gold itself, as backings for their individual currencies, or the BRICS currencies, if that's going to become a thing. And they'll use XRP and other technologies also for the payment mechanisms for cross, is the following. You have countries that are emerging, like economies like Latin America, the African nations, and Southeast Asian countries. Now, these are resource-rich economies. The only thing that's really held them back is to get anything in terms of infrastructure built or anything like that. You had really very little choices. You had to go to the US dollar and the IMF to borrow and all of these things, right? Now BRICS and China is supporting infrastructure, and they're footing the bill with a lot of these countries with a kind of a JV environment. But these countries, if we start adopting a commodities-based currency, then these countries like in Africa can start producing the resources and the commodities out of their own ground,
right.
and then start building their own infrastructure. You don't need the dollar, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I would suggest these countries get out of the use of the dollar and borrowing when you've got all the tools and mechanisms within your own individual country to build out your national infrastructure, build out your economy, do something for the people of those nations. And you mentioned Stellar and how it's going to be banking the unbankable, and that's great. But I think these countries need to take responsibility and start adopting means and mechanisms that they can build their own economy without the Western control system. And that's what I highly encourage, and that's what I love about emerging markets. I hope these countries start to move forward with just getting out of the U.S. and Western centric means and controls of finance and start building it within their own. And the BRICS alliance is probably one of the best things that can help with that.
Yeah, 100%. And you know what? If you even look closer, like what Texas is doing, there are some laws that have been passed in Texas where they're following the steps of the BRICS.
Yeah.
And then Texas can break off from the rest of the United States. Interesting. That's just a playful thought for the audience. And myself, I live in Texas, but that is the trend. That is what is happening. And just so you say about individuals becoming their own central banks, that's what it actually means to own XRP. And I hate to say it again, I know I'm repetitious about XRP, but owning XRP, you are a liquidity provider. You are the buyer and lender of last resort, if you understand how it really is designed to function. Meaning you don't need banks, you don't need central banks, you don't need other intermediaries. You are, again, the central bank. You are the provider of liquidity. You are the source. And that's what it means to own XRP. And that's why it's considered digital gold by the 1%ers. Now, they don't publicly talk about this. I talk about it on their behalf because nobody is listening to them and not able to analyze the devil in the detail when they talk about these technologies. And XRP, again, gives sovereignty to other countries to become their own central banks without the need for the dollar, like you said. And that will give them the opportunity to emerge from the shadows and build their own economies. That means everyone in the world can have a level playing field without the enslavement of the US dollar, which has again been used as a weapon and even against its own citizens and abroad. America doesn't do shit besides we export inflation, debt, and propaganda.
That's all. You're good at that. You're good at.
That's all we do. America likes to think it's civilized, but it's not. This is a country of people with baseball caps and automatic weapons. That's it. Yeah. There's no real value anymore. America has become compulsive consumers because of the dollar. And what is a country? A country is an aggregate of the people. And I find that to be very interesting. I read that in Ray Dalio's book, great book. It's called The World Changing Order. And he talks about how the shift from the West to the East is happening right now. So everything we talked about is for the audience to be educated on what's happening and just to take action to position yourself for the transition of what we discussed. Whether people like the details or not, it's totally fine, but you have to take action. They say knowledge is power. Bullshit. Knowledge is not power. Executing, taking action on what you know, that's power.
Yeah, well, history has always shown that money shifts around the world. So if you go way back in history, and I've, being Indian by background, I've started delving in as I've gotten older, delving into my roots a little more. And at one point, you can say China and India, and they were the biggest economies and the dominance. They controlled a lot of the dominance of global trade back in the day. And this is going like thousands and thousands of years back. Then then you had, and I'm not going to get into geopolitics and wars and who did what to which country, but a lot of the wealth got taken away from some of these countries like India throughout history. And then it shifted more into Europe and the European nations. Then you had in the last 100 years, that shift went to the US. and now it kind of has gone back to China. But we're at a point where I think, these emerging markets is where the next paradigm shift is going to happen for exponential growth and stuff like that. So money, it just seems like money shifts around the world, and the globalist elites, if you want to call them whatever, the ones that back and control all of this, they have no loyalty to any one side. They actually play both sides, and they probably are the backers of these shifts around the world. So it's not an ironic situation where the manufacturing and the infrastructure that the U.S. had dominance over moved over to China. Like, it wouldn't surprise me that these elitists, or whatever you want to call them, globalists, they were backing China because they had got involved in it a long time ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. So these things don't happen out of circumstance or randomness. These are planned events. And I think they are planning for a demise of the U.S. and taking away that leverage and power they've had with the U.S. dollar, which is now why they move into this global framework. And they've always talked about one world government and that, and whether we're going to play into it because of the crypto market and where it's going into, and not, individual global currencies. Again, it's just a trend, but money shifts around the world. And I think this is where what we're going to see happen gets played out from now over the next 20, 30, 40 years. And these emerging markets are going to benefit from it more so than the US. I mean, you're going to get pockets in the US, like Texas, you mentioned. They're actually coming out. BlackRock's looking at starting a Texas stock exchange. Texas has actually talked about backing their currency with gold. A couple of other states have talked about it too. So as you're going to see gold get talked about more and more as a backing of national currencies, as well as some other things, I actually do believe the US, there's going to be certain states that are just going to say, well, we're going to protect our wealth and we're going to back our people's state money with gold. And it'd be an interesting environment to actually see the states issuing gold-backed bonds for the states themselves. Now, I've actually talked to a company that's doing gold-backed bonds. Has been the first ones done in a long time, and they're offering money and gold leasing. And I'm betting them a little more for my gold report that they did a long time ago, and I'm updating it into digital gold asset ownerships in the new forms and what's happening now versus what happened 14 or 12 years ago when I first wrote that report. But I just see, as much as if you can't escape the US, there's going to be opportunities for you to profit and protect yourself if you have to remain in the US. But my first preference would be to tell people, hell, why would you even want to be in that craziness? Just get out and enjoy your place, enjoy your life in another country.
Well, that's the thing. A lot to unpack in what you said. First of all, it's very challenging for a lot of people to break the habit and get out the system that they have been trapped in. Because, again, like we talked about earlier, is that by the time they make that money, they work 72 hours a week, 42, whatever. The money comes in, prices are higher. How can you invest? How can you leave? You can't. And there's another thing you said, is that people have to understand, I think local governments, and that's the difference between local governments and the federal government. The federal government and the bureaucracy around the federal government has destroyed this nation. Local governments need to take action to protect their state. That's what we need to see. We need to see the division between local governments and the federal government, because the federal government is the one who's perpetuating the wars, who's perpetuating this debt crisis, helping build the military-industrial complex, committing genocide, and we're paying for it with our tax dollars. So there's a lot of information that goes into what's happening in the world. So I think what we're going to see over the next 10 years, and we talked about this and you said it so nicely, is that as we see countries walk away from the dollar, using other technologies to circumvent it, other economies will emerge. There will be opportunities, not might, to find an exit strategy outside of here. And we do teach this in our courses as well, certain exit strategies and taxes, how to avoid paying taxes on your crypto and your digital assets. We have loopholes for this. We found them. But it's just a very strange time, and you have to be very cautious what you do with your money right now, the decisions you make, because if you make the wrong moves, you can easily get wiped out. You have to be very careful, man. But you're right about one thing, is about a lot of what you said, but getting out of the US, I think, is something a lot of people do need to think about until we see this transition fully play out. Another thing I want to say is, going back to a gold standard in the United States, it's very possible to see such a situation play out, which then brings me into what the Bank of International Settlements is doing. They have a document called the Gold Revaluation. And what I'm trying to say is that I believe that central banks always knew that they could use this in their arsenal when the right time came. So it's very possible that the dollar goes back to a gold standard too.
Well, I think they're going to do it coinciding with the whole new digital asset reevaluation. So if you think about it, you're the Black Swan Capitalist. If we get this Black Swan event, not if, when, it's more of a when than if. When you get that and they have to reevaluate all fiat currencies, all central bank currencies, maybe you're going to have a reset. So when we got off the gold standard in the 70s, gold took off in price. When they nationalized and took away gold from people in the, I think it was the 30s or 20s or early, or I can't remember the date. I should know these things, but you went from one gold price to another. So I think you're going to come to a point where the reset is going to happen, and then you mentioned the BIS having a reevaluation of gold. I think it's all going to happen at one time.
Yes.
You're going to see the writing on the wall slowly, and that's when you know it's coming. But then it'll be just boom, all of a sudden,
And that's called the Kendra Hill.
It's there.
Yeah, the Kendra Hill theory focuses specifically on XRP and the intersection with the reevaluation of precious metals and so forth. But that's basically what the theory talks about, is that there's going to be this major Black Swan event. All the work is being done right now. It's all being laid out for when such a situation occurs. And that's why I believe that Kendra Hill theory might play out instantaneously. Again, going back to the IMF setting the price with the central banks, the adoption is already there. What I'm trying to say is that the stage has already been set.
Yeah.
It is in motion for the full-scale global adoption of the digital asset XRP, which is the liquidity driver of where this is all going. So there's just so many pieces of information that contribute into this discussion. And, I wish we had more time to talk about everything.
Yeah, well, even back when I was covering gold in the earlier days, and I kind of got out of it, but in about 2016, they made gold as a tier 1 asset class.
Yes.
On the banking system. And I realized from that point, the bear market in gold was really to divert people's attention away from gold so they can continually accumulate and make their plans. And this is just that whole smoke and mirrors tactic that they all use all the time. So, I agree. I think XRP, gold, diversification is key to all surviving this transition period. And then there's ways to prosper from it. Out of the ashes, the phoenix rises. And I believe that we're going to have that opportunity. And I really just want to be able to share this with the audience here, your audience, and let people become aware that, well, this is happening whether you like it or not. And you can either accept it or you don't, but there's ways to benefit from it and prosper from it. And I'd love for people to be able to protect themselves during this transition. And we've talked about a couple of ways to do that in this interview and this chat. And but again, I'm not a licensed financial advisor. I don't give financial advice. I just like to provide financial education more than anything itself. But if there's any kind of wrap up or any final thoughts you have you'd like to share, and then also share your contact and detailed information, I'll also link it below and share that on the video itself.
Yeah, my final thoughts is this. I'm trying my best to keep it short. I tend to run my mouth. That's why I have a podcast. But as we look to the future, it's going to be very clear that there are going to be winners and there are going to be losers in the evolving financial landscape. And I think that those who understand the changes that are happening and learn how to adopt to the evolving financial landscape are going to be far better off than those who remain uninformed. Last thing is that the convergence between blockchain technology, central bank strategies, and global financial institutions in the world in ways we still do not comprehend. Just take action and stay informed, ask questions, and yeah, question every narrative that's being thrown at you. And even look at history sometimes to just understand the developments of what's happening. But this is the reset of everything. And it's about really control. And, the more you understand about the mechanisms behind this control system, I think the better equipped you're going to be to protect your individual freedoms and just better make informed decisions. So, I really have so much love for people out there as individuals. I don't like people in communities, to be honest. It's just individuals out there. Everybody deserves the opportunity to participate in this, and it's easy. You really could just take action. I think that's pretty much it. As far as contacting me, I'm not a financial advisor, but I do financial consulting on what I've studied for so long. You can reach us at blackswancapitalist.io or the YouTube channel, or even on Twitter, Versan Algera.
Great. Just kind of, I try to tell people that they should stop believing and start seeking. And it's kind of an ideology that came from India and stuff like that. And so with financial liberties itself, I highly encourage people to seek financial liberties, because there's a big difference in the word of believing and seeking. And people really have to stop believing in the old narrative and what they've been told and start seeking the truth, or what they believe is the truth. And that is where I think you're going to get start seeking financial liberties. And so that's kind of the whole thing of me starting financial liberties just recently is, seek it. That's kind of my thing. And I'm glad we had this conversation. I thank you for coming on and speaking with me. And, went quite a bit longer than what we were expecting, but obviously the conversation was great and it flowed well. And thank you for coming on.
It was an absolute pleasure, man. And I commend you what you're doing. Anyone out there who's putting information to help people, that's the best you can do. You're doing God's work.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. It was great speaking with you. And I look forward to another interview in the future. Maybe we kind of discuss doing a bit of a group fire chat with a few other individuals. I'd love to look forward to that if we organize that.
Yeah, 100%. I'll reach out to some of our contacts and see if we could do something where we can just have that fireside chat. It'll be great. So I'm looking forward to our next discussion, man. Thank you so much, Finn.
All right. Okay. Take care. Pleasure. And thank you everyone for listening to this video. Hope you enjoyed it. And don't forget to follow my channel, follow the Black Swan Capitalist. And Versan, thank you very much for being on the show.
My pleasure. Take care.
Take care. Bye.